If you're planning on falling asleep, please like the video now and say hello in the comments. Thanks. Okay, before I get into the story, there's a few things I need to explain about my country, South Africa, for you to fully understand the story. In South Africa, it's normal to have high brick walls with electric gates, electric fences, and alarms. The crime here is hectic. It's also pretty normal to have big gardens. My family and I are big animal lovers, so at the time we had 6 dogs. 2 Shar-Peis, 2 German short-haired pointers, and 2 dachshunds. With that being said, our dogs roam freely around the garden as it's obviously enclosed. We usually leave the veranda door open during the day for them to do their thing. Another thing about South Africa, it's normal to have a live-in maid and a gardener. Like, the average family usually employs them. It's not only for wealthy people, which seems to be a thing in other countries. For the story, our maid is Ellie and our gardener is Vince. So this happened in 2007 when I was 9 years old. My older brother was 10 and we had just gotten our first cell phones that day. My dad surprised us after work. You may think we were quite young to have phones, but it was used for emergencies or to communicate with our parents. Anyways, it's an important piece of info for the story. We don't usually leave our veranda door open at night due to security reasons, but I remember it being a hot summer night that night. So of course, this night of all nights, the veranda door was wide open and the dogs were doing their thing in the garden. My brother and I were in my parents' room setting up our new cell phones, all excited. Ellie's daughter, who was 18, was like an older sister to us, and she was helping my brother and I. My dad was somewhere in the house and my mom was in the bath. I specifically remember the maid's daughter making a comment about how the dogs would not shut up and how annoying it was. That's why I noticed it as well. Sure, they bark, but it was usually the dachshunds that yapped when the bigger dogs just chilled. Plus, it would only happen for a few minutes, then they'd get over it. Something was different that night, as even the bigger dogs were barking non-stop. My dad appeared in our room and mentioned to us that he also noticed the dogs' incessant barking and he was going to check if everything was okay. No alarm bells went off in my head, and I don't believe my dad thought anything was amiss either, because my brother asked to investigate with him and my dad agreed. I was obviously too engrossed in my new Sony Ericsson. My dad said he had a terrible feeling because of this and because of how out of character the dogs were acting. He called after them. They usually come running, but tonight they all seemed to just look at him. They then turned back around and continued going crazy at this dark corner down the steps. My dad told my brother to go back inside the house and get a torch, sort of using it as an excuse for my brother not to come with him because of this off feeling. When my brother went back inside, my dad slowly approached the steps. He noticed how the dogs seemed to be snapping at whatever it was, hiding just out of view in the darkness. As he got to the steps, he noticed the lamp was smashed. Confused, he inched to the steps, and just as he realized what was happening, it was too late. My dad, being an ex-vet and avid hunter, felt something cold against his temple and immediately knew it was a gun. 4 men in balaclavas stepped out of the darkness, all armed. Shocked, he stood frozen on the steps. The man holding the gun to his head was instantly aggressive and asked him where my brother was. He said that he saw my dad come out with my brother, but my brother went back into the house. My dad said something came over him, and before he knew what he was saying, he responded by saying he's gone inside to press the panic button. As he said it, he saw how all of these guys started to panic. They started speaking in an African language called Zulu, assuming my dad couldn't understand because it's not common for white people to speak it. But my dad had actually grown up on a farm where he learned it fluently because of the farm workers. The aggressive guy holding the gun said, in Zulu, "Shit. The cops will be here any minute. Let's just kill this guy, grab what we can, and leave." The others seemed apprehensive, and a smaller guy seemed really on edge and continued to say how he can't go back to jail again. and they need to get out of there before the cops show, which would be any minute. He was panicking. My dad then took advantage of this guy's fear. My dad interrupted them, speaking English, pretending to not understand what they're saying, and said that we usually have armed response vehicles that drove in our area, and since my brother pushed the panic button so long ago, they'll probably be here any second. And that did the trick. My dad watched as their plan unraveled before them. The smaller, scared guys started freaking out all of the other guys, saying that they need to leave ASAP, or else they'd be caught. He seemed to make the others more nervous and lose confidence until they started full-on bickering amongst themselves. Their plan was slowly turning to shit, as a third guy had put it. The aggressive guy pointing the gun to my dad's head slowly lowered it as they started fighting, losing focus on my dad and shifting his focus onto his crew. My dad then used this as an opportunity to slowly back up the steps and turn to dart towards the house. As luck would have it, as my dad ran into the veranda door, my oblivious brother was heading out with a torch. My dad scooped him up under his arm and sprinted into the house, not even closing the door behind him. Silly, but I think he just wanted to get my brother inside as quick as possible without even thinking. The maid's daughter and I were obviously also oblivious to everything when my dad rushed through the bedroom door, slammed it shut, and told us to go upstairs into the attic. There's 5 guys outside with guns. They're here to hurt us. Get upstairs now. My heart sank. I remember my body automatically responding and me sprinting to the stairs. My mom ran out of the bathroom in a towel, not too far behind. We sat there in the darkness and silence. I swear you could hear a pin drop. I think we were all just waiting to hear something below us in the rooms. My mom cursed, saying she didn't have a phone, and neither did my dad. But as luck would have it, in my hand was my brand new Sony Ericsson. No better emergency to use it than now, right? My mom dials the police, and I kid you not, when they asked where we lived, they told us it wasn't in their jurisdiction. Sorry. Click. The line goes dead. We're now not only shitting ourselves, but we're flabbergasted. My mom starts cursing like a sailor again, and that's when my dad realizes, damn. He didn't close the veranda door, and what about Ellie and Vince, who are in their rooms, blissfully unaware of the danger they're in? He gets his firearm in the safe in the attic and tells us that whatever we hear, to not come downstairs. To stay hidden no matter what. Now I'm sobbing, begging my dad not to leave us, but he tells us he has to go get the others before something bad happens to them. Now there's even more tears, as reality hits that there's 2 other people still in danger. The maid's daughter is understandably in hysterics, because she's also fearing for her mom downstairs. My dad disappears and the air is thick with tension. We can still hear the dogs going crazy, indicating that those men were still on our property. My mom then calls another number, the armed security that drives around the area, and they say they'll be over in about 10 to 15 minutes. They say to wait and stay hidden until they ring our bell at the gate. We all wait in silence, fearing that we'll hear a gunshot or anything indicating these men are in our house. But there was just silence. The only sound was the dog's barks outside. After what seemed like hours, most likely a couple minutes, we heard stomping coming up the stairs and my heart rate quickened. I remember shutting my eyes and praying that it was my dad, with Ellie and Vince. Luckily, it was. We all hid for a while, no one dared to speak. The dogs seemed to have calmed down considerably, but were still barking every now and then. The gate intercom rang and my dad told us to wait while he checked if it was the security company, and sure enough, it was. He opened up and the nightmare was over. I remember standing up and my knees buckling from the adrenaline my body endured. The armed security somehow notified the right police for our jurisdiction, and everyone investigated the garden. They found that there were actually 7 pairs of footprints and that these guys had bent the spikes on our wall and just climbed over. We got an electric fence shortly after. So there must have been 2 other guys hiding in the shadows that my dad hadn't seen. Which is actually creepy in its own right. South Africa's violent crime is quite bad, and it's sickeningly common for torture and other terrible things to happen during home invasions. I was obviously so young at the time, I didn't know the horrors of the world and was just scared of my family getting hurt. Now that I'm older, just the thought of 4 women being in the house and my mom being in nothing but a bath towel gives me the chills to this day. The cops said the fact that there were so many guys, instead of like 1 to 3, indicates that these guys possibly had sinister intentions. Thank goodness nothing happened to my family, and I'm forever thankful for my dad's quick thinking regarding the panic button. Also, I'm so glad my dad understands Zulu and could manipulate the situation to benefit us. Lastly, my family will forever be in debt to our good boys and girls that warned us that night. A terrifying and life-changing outcome would have 100% happened had it not been for our incredible dogs. From that day onwards, my dad always gave them leftover rice or meat with their dinner. I'm sure there was a special place in heaven reserved for you angels. If you're enjoying the video, please leave a like. Hello. I'm a 20-year-old French girl. I'm sorry in advance if there are any mistakes, hope you can understand me. To set the context, I live in a suburb in a small residence with 6 houses. My gate is often broken, and most of the time it's wide open, giving easy access to our small courtyard. My house has 1 floor with 4 bedrooms, including mine. Downstairs, there's a guest bedroom which we use as a treatment room due to my health issues. It's where we keep all the equipment and medicines. I also have a dog who means the world to me. He feels everything and even senses my epileptic seizures before they happen. He can even tell when the nurses are arriving by the sound of their tires in our yard. He never barks unless there's a problem. A nurse visits me 4 to 5 times a day for treatments, including infusions. This is an important part of my story. One morning, as usual, my nurse, Sandra, arrived at 8 a.m. She administered my treatment, and we chatted like we always did. After about 40 minutes, she left, saying she might be a little late next time, but I shouldn't be worried. That day, my parents were at work, and I had a medical appointment in the morning. I was home alone, except for the nurse's visits every 4 hours. When I returned from my appointment, I sat on the sofa with my dog while waiting for the next nurse. When I heard tire noises, I thought it was Sandra arriving a bit early. My dog started growling, which was unusual. I looked at the time, 11:50 a.m. I assumed Sandra might have switched with the previous patient, as she sometimes did. I heard a knock and I went to the door. I saw a young woman I had never met before. She introduced herself as Camille, a 3rd year at nursing school, and explained that Sandra had sent her to prepare my treatment. I wasn't suspicious. I was used to students coming over. But I was a bit surprised because Sandra usually informed me in the morning or sent a message. Also, she never left a student alone on the first visit. I led Camille to the treatment room and showed her the way. While she washed her hands, my dog's behavior became strange. He growled as she approached me and circled me, so I decided to leave him in the living room and close the door to keep him calm. I didn't pay much attention to what Camille was doing. I was on my phone at that moment. Then, I noticed she was preparing a syringe rather than using the pre-made saline syringe as usual. I glanced up and saw that my treatment ampoules were untouched, but I had heard the distinct sound of ampoules breaking. Something felt off. As she approached me with the syringe, I received a message from Sandra saying she'd be there in 5 minutes and asked me to start setting up the equipment. I made up an excuse, telling Camille that I needed to use the restroom and left her in the treatment room. My dog kept barking and growling. When I reached the toilet downstairs, I sent Sandra a message telling her about the woman, and she had no idea what I was talking about. I was terrified and started crying in the bathroom. Camille came to check on me and asked if everything was okay. I assured her it was, and that's when I heard the front door slam shut. 2 minutes later, it reopened, and I heard Sandra's voice. I left the bathroom, still crying, and Sandra asked me what had happened. I explained the situation and showed her the treatment room. We called the police, who arrived, examined the evidence, and took samples from the syringe and other items prepared by Camille. The test results were shocking. The syringe contained a paralyzing substance, enough to paralyze a 120 kilograms man, and the IV contained a highly concentrated medicine that could have stopped anyone's heart. To this day, we don't know who Camille really was. Thankfully, I never heard from her again. She had stolen all my opioids but left my tablet and computer untouched. Looking back, I realized my dog had sensed Camille's ill intentions. I should have been more vigilant, especially since she was a stranger and on her own. My treatments are far from simple. I often wonder what could have happened if I hadn't checked my phone that day. I had blocked this story from my memory until my girlfriend reminded me of it a couple days ago. I started dating my girlfriend at the end of my senior year, and I used multiple dating apps before we started dating. I had my Snapchat listed in many of my dating app profiles. This is important. Nothing led to anything with the apps. I talked to people for a bit and eventually the conversation would die out. When I began dating my girlfriend, I had deleted the apps but never deleted my account, meaning people could still see my profile and my Snapchat account. I realized this after a few people would add me, but it didn't bother me much because I'd tell them I had a girlfriend. As you would imagine, the conversation would end at that point. But there was this one guy that added me, let's call him Adam. And he asked me if I was available. Being straight, I was used to guys adding me, so I gave him the usual response. Sorry, I'm straight and I have a girlfriend. I expected him to leave me alone, but it didn't stop him. At first the messages were normal. How was your day? What did you do today? Simple stuff like that. Being the nice guy I am, I responded because I thought this guy just wanted to be friends, and having a gay friend is okay with me. Then the messages progressively got more creepy. He started asking questions about my girlfriend, and not the basic questions. As the days passed, I started to notice that Tyler's vocabulary was very similar to Adam's. I wasn't sure about it, so I didn't make any assumptions that it was him. I shared Tyler's Snapchat with my girlfriend, who added him to investigate. As soon as she added Tyler's snap, Tyler flipped out on her, confirming that it was indeed Adam. Realizing this, I blocked him again. After that, everything went quiet from Adam for about a month. I live in the suburbs of Chicago, and both my girlfriend and I live down the street from each other. We often see each other, and our families are good friends. Anyway, a month went by until I received a letter with no address or name on it, just my name on the front. I opened it, and to my shock and horror, it was basically a love letter from Adam. The letter expressed his love for me and his desire for me to run off with him. The letter took a very sexual turn halfway through, with explicit descriptions of what he wanted to do to me. At that moment, I had two horrifying realizations. One was that he knew my address, and two, he had dropped off the letter himself, meaning he was in my town. I immediately called my girlfriend, who was equally shocked. After consulting with my parents, we called the cops. Unfortunately, since I had blocked and removed Adam's social media information and the letter had no return address, there was nothing we could do about it. Day after day, letters kept appearing in my mailbox until they also started showing up at my girlfriend's place. Her letters were far worse than mine. Adam wrote about how much he hated her and how he wanted to hurt her. He described in detail the ways he would inflict pain on her until she broke up with me. Like me, she reported this to the police, but they could do nothing about it. My girlfriend's family had plans to go to Hawaii for vacation, and I was house sitting for them. The first couple of days went fine until one of the last nights of the week. As usual, I was at their house, watching TV on the couch, when the power went out. It was around 1 a.m., and it was pitch black. The next few seconds were silent, and then I heard a window smash from the office. To help you understand the layout of the house, when you entered the front door, the living room was on your left. Straight ahead were both the kitchen and stairs, and to the right were the office and dining room. Upstairs, as soon as you reached the top of the stairs, there was a bathroom straight ahead. My girlfriend's room was on the right, and the other bedrooms were on the left. I immediately grabbed a kitchen knife and ran upstairs to hide while I called the cops. I quickly got into my girlfriend's room and slipped into the closet. As soon as I was able to contact the operator, I heard the intruder pounding up the steps. Thankfully, I had relayed all the information to the operator in time, and she stayed on the phone as we both remained quiet. The intruder took a left when he reached the top of the stairs, which gave more time for the cops to arrive and for me to get ready, just in case I needed to defend myself. A few minutes passed until I heard the intruder start walking toward my girlfriend's room. In the precious seconds I had, I slipped out of the closet and positioned myself next to the door. As soon as he opened the door and started to enter the room, I took the kitchen knife and drove it into his shoulder. A young man screamed in pain as I heard a heavy metallic object make a large thud as it hit the ground. From there, I bolted out of the house, where I was met by 4 squad cars and cops with their guns raised. I raised my hands, shouting that he was upstairs in the right room. A few minutes passed, and the intruder was dragged out, still screaming in pain. With the siren lights flooding the street, I got a glimpse of his face. It was Adam. Later, an officer informed me that the metallic thud was caused by him dropping his handgun. Adam was from Texas and had traveled up to my state to be with me. He had rented a room at a local motel and would put letters in both my girlfriend's and my mailbox daily. He was doing this in the early hours of the morning. This was confirmed by the security footage from the motel he was staying at. On the night of the break-in, Adam had plans to kill my girlfriend and her family so that I would choose to be with him. He managed to pry open the power box, switched off the power to her house along with neighboring houses, and broke in with the intention of her being there. Well, unfortunately for him, she was enjoying a tropical vacation. To be honest, I have no idea how the outcome would have been different if they hadn't gone on vacation, and I am grateful that I still have my girlfriend as well as her family alive. So, to any stalkers out there, please stay away from my girlfriend. This happened to me over a decade ago, but I will never forget the feeling deep in my chest. Both that night and the next morning when the true nature of the situation became apparent. It was late December in a small Texas town. We just received 5 inches of snow earlier in the morning. I can't remember what time it was. All I remember is it was dark outside, and I was playing in my room. It's important to note that my room was made up of 2 parts, a mudroom with a door leading out front, then my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wood door with all the old hardware, and had a window on the top half. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they wanted. My room was the frontmost, with my parents' room being in the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt something weird. Like someone was watching me. I was facing the door at this point and looked right up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade, staring for any reason to feel unsafe and run. After a while, I was sure that there was nothing, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I got the feeling again. This time I didn't look at the door, but instead moved so that my back was now to the door, hoping that it was all in my head. Just then, the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door, like the doorknob had been touched. I was still turned around. I was completely frozen at the metal sound of the doorknob. It was moving. I didn't know how or why, but it was moving, slowly turning, testing the lock. I wanted to move, but I was frozen. It was like someone glued every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents had been in the shower, all the way at the back of the house, leaving me at the front all alone. The only room lit up was mine. Suddenly, the knob was not being gently moved, someone was turning it with force. This door was one that had to be locked from the inside, so the knob could turn and open freely. Luckily, there were 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side just figured out the knob was free to open. As soon as I heard it turn all the way, I sprung up to the wall about 5 feet from the door, my back to the wall. The door fell silent. I found myself glued to the wall, unable to move. Then, the knob turned slowly. I remember watching, waiting for it to turn all the way. When it did, whoever was on the other side started trying to budge the door and pry. At first, it was easy going, but then they started pounding into the door with their foot. They got only 2 kicks in when I unfroze and screamed for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents. They asked what was wrong, and I said someone tried to break in. They ran over and checked, not bothering to look outside, which I pleaded them to. They just said my imagination was running wild and it was an animal or the old age of the house. They took one final look in my mudroom, not bothering to investigate any further. I was told to go to bed. It took me hours. I don't even remember falling asleep. All I remember is staring at the door from my bed, never taking my eyes off the doorknob. Suddenly, I was woken up by my parents, who were obviously distressed and seemed to be scared. My mom grabbed me by both shoulders and got right in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought someone tried to break in. When I told them this time, they seemed to listen. I was worried how serious they were as they asked me about everything. When I was done, they said they had to show me something. They took me to the front door and out to the front yard, pointing to my door near the driveway. You could clearly see the boot prints in the snow, walking along the street through our yard and straight to my window, then my mudroom door, where I had been playing the night before. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever came of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house. I can never forget what it felt like as a child to go through this and not have my parents believe me. I'm just glad I was not home alone and very thankful for that strong door. If you're a fan of the video, please subscribe. I always love reading your opinions in the comments. About 10 years ago, I lived on my own and didn't have much company. I was quite depressed at the time after losing my girlfriend to a drunk driver. I was enjoying a beer and watching the sunset on the back porch when I saw a massive scruffy man emerging from the tree line. My heart skipped a beat as he stumbled towards my house in a menacing way. Living alone, I often used my backyard for target practice. And at that moment, I was immensely grateful for it. Instinctively, I rushed to bolt all the doors while frantically dialing the police. What I didn't know was that this intruder had broken in the day before through a basement window and had spent the night squatting there. He had left the basement door unlocked, and at this point, he'd made his way inside the house and was making his way up the stairs towards me. I gripped my rifle, aiming it at the approaching man as he descended the hallway. I shouted at him, ordering him to stop and get on the ground, but he just kept walking towards me. I fired the first round, loaded with rock salt, but he showed no reaction. I quickly followed with a rubber bullet to the chest. Yet the drugged-up guy, who was clearly out of his mind, continued advancing. This guy was huge, at least twice my size, and I realized that whatever drugs he had in his body were going to push him through any pain that a rubber bullet would inflict. He was backing me into a corner. I desperately begged him to stop and warned him what would happen, but he just moaned at me like a zombie and shouted, "Shoot! Do it!" Then he lunged towards me. I took my third shot. It left a gaping hole in his chest. It barely even slowed him down. He kept coming, and in a frenzied struggle, he wrestled me to the ground. He was moaning and coughing up blood. Suddenly, he grabbed my face with both of his massive hands and started squeezing my head. It was utterly terrifying. I could feel him trying to burst my skull open like a balloon. I don't know how long it actually lasted, but it felt like forever. Eventually, the injury finally caught up with him, and he died on top of me. I was laying with him crushing me for a few minutes. My energy was completely drained, and I could barely breathe with his weight on top of me. His body was pushing my rifle into my chest, and it was causing me serious pain when I tilted his body to the side. I was completely drenched in his blood, and I can still remember the overwhelming smell. I'd completely forgotten that I was still on the phone with the operator, who had heard our entire exchange, which more or less amounted to me pleading, "Stop, or I'll shoot," and the man menacingly taunting. The police arrived soon after, and the incident made it to the local papers. There was a criminal investigation, but eventually, I was cleared of any wrongdoing. It turned out that the intruder was wanted for murder of an elderly couple in Baltimore and had somehow made his way 50 miles up the road into a rural area. Many years ago, I used to work the night shift at a hotel in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. During the season, it wasn't too bad, mostly families and tourists. We had on-site security back then. However, in the off-season, the winter months were different. The cheap weekly rates we offer attracted a lot of creepy people. The idea was supposed to be to make money in the off-season by renting to snowbirds, older retired people who came to the beach for about a month through the winter. It did not always work out that way. The cheap rates made it possible for a less than desirable element to become long-term residents. I've discovered more than my fair share of meth labs, broken up physical assaults, and more during the winter months. Working the third shift, I would meet some interesting people. The cold weather would mean some homeless people would come in to get warm and grab some free coffee. I wasn't supposed to let them, but it's not in me to be cruel. I would let them grab a coffee and get warm for a minute, as long as they didn't cause trouble. As you can see, night shift in the winter made for some crazy and sometimes creepy stories. I have a lot, but this one is one that stands out because it didn't end well for me. I had a great night up to this point. I had gone to an indie wrestling show with my best friend before work. In fact, I had agreed to come in an hour early the next night for the young lady that worked the second shift, in exchange for her working an hour late for me. Ironically enough, I met Terry Funk that night, a wrestling legend known for his hardcore matches. Little did I know I was about to experience this kind of violence for real. I was supposed to be there at midnight, due to her working over an hour for me. I normally came in at 11 p.m. I counted the register, and she briefed me on her shift as to what had happened, as per usual. As she was leaving, my friend Andrew arrived. He worked second shift maintenance at this hotel and the other 2 hotels our company owned. He would regularly stop by after work, go grab us some food, and we would play World of Warcraft on our laptops after eating for a while since business was slow. He was just getting my money for the food, getting ready to leave. I was excited, telling him about how much fun I had at the wrestling show and showing him my Terry Funk t-shirt that I was so proud of. I was just walking into the back office to put the shirt up when I heard the doorbell indicating a customer had entered. It's true what they say, ask not for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. I had turned around when I heard someone say something loudly, but I still couldn't make out what they had said. I had just reached the doorway when I saw Andrew fall down in front of me. The next thing I know, a guy walks around the corner and punches me in the head with a short steel pipe in his hand. It staggered me, and I fell to the ground. Before I could react, he hits me in the head with the pipe. I suddenly heard another guy that I hadn't even noticed. He was panicking because he thought that one of us had ran to get a cop. They left out the door. I was finally able to get to my feet. I tried to call the police from the phone in the back office, but it was having issues. I slammed it in frustration. I was hurting and scared, really freaking out. I realized that they could come back, so I ran and locked the door. I didn't know where Andrew had gone, and that worried me. I called 911 and started to notice the blood pouring down my head. I told the operator I had been attacked and needed an officer and an ambulance. I then called Travis, the manager of the hotel, to tell him what had happened. He thought I was messing with him at first because when we got bored, we would usually prank each other. I finally convinced him I was not joking. So he told me he was heading over straight away. The cops and the ambulance pulled up, and I opened the door. It was at this time I found out that after they sucker punched him and knocked him down, Andrew was able to amazingly jump over the desk and escape. He ran out just as a cop was driving by, which he ran to flag down for help. I ended up in the hospital emergency room where I had to have 10 staples in my scalp, and they gave me morphine for pain. I had no way to get home after being treated, but the doctor and nurses took pity on me and paid for a cab. My plan was to go back to work because this was December and Christmas was coming. I had 3 kids and needed all the hours I could get. When I got back to the hotel, the IT guy Ted was there with his wife Barbara, who also worked at the front desk. She was shocked to see me. She thought I would still be in the hospital. I thought I had only been hit in the head once after being punched. But the video which Ted was pulling for the police showed a different story. After I went to the ground, the guy had hit me not just one time, but 10 times in total. I kept trying to grab the pipe and get up, for some reason. I do not remember that. I guess I was knocked pretty hard. He kept punching me and hitting me with the pipe until his friend told him that Andrew got away and then got the cops. The 2 of them then ran out. I was given a room at the other hotel. And Ted and Barbara gave me a lift there as I was in no condition to drive due to the morphine. They also gave me a paid week off to heal. They switched me over to the other hotel on the night shift for a month, just in case they were after me in particular. We never found out why they chose to attack me. The police thought it might be a failed strong-arm robbery due to Andrew getting away and me not just going down. Not knowing why they attacked me really shook me up. Even though I was at our other hotel when I came back to work the night shift, I was still nervous. I tensed up every time the door chimed. I couldn't afford to quit. As I said, I had 3 kids I was supporting. They never caught the guys as far as I know. A detective stopped by about 2 months later when I was working the second shift. He showed me several mug shots and asked me if any of them looked familiar. I never got a great look at them as it all happened so fast. I had seen the video, which wasn't the best quality. Even so, 2 of them looked very familiar. I pointed them out, and he asked me how sure I was. I told him honestly, like 85%. He then yelled and asked me if I wanted someone to go to jail for attempted murder on 85%. I was stunned into silence. I was the victim. I was attacked for no reason, and he is yelling at me like it's my fault. I was too busy being attacked to get a good look at them. I no longer work at a hotel on the night shift, and I'm glad, because it's just too dangerous in this area. Night shifts at hotels can be risky, and after my terrifying experience, I decided it was time for a change. For a while, the memories of that night haunted me. The feeling of being so vulnerable, the pain from the attack, and the lingering questions about the attacker's motives all weighed heavily on my mind. But over time, I began to heal, both physically and emotionally. I found a new job with better working hours and conditions, which provided me with the opportunity to spend more time with my kids. The sense of safety and security that had been shattered during that fateful night gradually returned. Life moved on, and I left the hotel industry behind. I learned that sometimes it's necessary to prioritize your well-being over financial concerns. My new job allowed me to support my family while maintaining a more stable work-life balance. I never did find out what motivated the attackers that night. They remained at large, leaving behind a trail of questions and unresolved mysteries. However, I chose not to dwell on the past, but to look forward to a brighter future. Though the scars on my scalp served as a physical reminder of that harrowing night, they also symbolized my resilience and ability to overcome adversity. It was a chapter of my life that had come to an end, and I was determined to write a new, safer, and happier story for myself and my family. Please remember to like the video if you're enjoying the stories, leave a comment about your thoughts, and subscribe if you haven't already. I need to preface this by saying that I don't believe in ghosts or any other kind of paranormal activity. This is not an attempt to convince people of their existence. What I will say is that I have an open mind regarding things that I can't explain using logic or reasoning. I know something happened to me, I just don't know what. And nothing I've heard so far has come anywhere near a satisfactory explanation. But then, that's what had me creeped out about it. If I could just chalk it up to seeing a ghost or witnessing a glitch in the Matrix, as I've heard people call it, or any of that, at least I could draw a line under it and move on. But I can't. Because I have no idea what happened that night, and neither does anyone else. I used to work for a security company that contracted overnight work for large office buildings in downtown Houston. Some of the buildings were real nice places, and their security offices had all kinds of amenities that others just didn't have. The only problem was they made for some of the most boring overnight shifts you could possibly imagine. Tough guards can be exhausting and dangerous, but boredom is a different kind of poison altogether. So you understand what I say, out of all the places that I could have expected my scariest night working security, these places didn't get anywhere near the top 10. One of the buildings we worked in had a bunch of different offices on each floor with a layout, each one being shaped like a letter U. Each of the floors was owned by a different company for the most part. Anyway, so most had a different design but the same layout, and part of that layout were those polished metal plates that sat on the corner of each corridor. They were positioned at the 90-degree angles in the U shape. At first, I figured it was just an odd design choice. Then I figured out that they were like mirrors. If someone was walking down the connecting corridor and you couldn't see them, you'd be able to see a little movement in the polished metal so you wouldn't run into anyone or get a fright. Kind of clever, right? Well, listen to this. One night, I'm working the overnight shift with 2 other coworkers. When it comes my turn to perform a physical sweep of the building, we had most of the building mapped out with cameras, but no security guard worth his salt relies on electronics. So every half hour, one of the guards would take a quick walk around each of the floors just to make sure everything was A-okay. Most of the guys would just take elevators up and down, but it was around this time that I decided to take the stairs a few times a night to get some exercise. I was a few pounds heavier than I wanted to be, and walking up even 5 or 6 flights of stairs sucked. So I took as many flights as I could, then took the elevator the rest of the way. It also helped kill time on those hellish shifts. Anyway, this one time, I managed to hustle all the way up to the 9th floor, which was totally a new record for me. But I was completely out of gas. I literally had to lean against the wall to catch my breath, making sure to stay in the stairwell's blind spots so my coworkers wouldn't watch and laugh at me. Once I had myself together again, I walked out into the corridor and towards the first bend in the U-shaped layout that I mentioned earlier. As I got within a few feet of it, I froze. For the first time in the whole time that I'd worked there, I saw a reflection in the polished metal mirror thing. It wasn't crystal clear, but it was absolutely different to how it usually looked. I had the usual reflective image ingrained into my memory because I saw it hundreds of times a night. I could clearly see someone standing in the connecting hallway, wearing what looked to be the same kind of security uniform as me. I called out, thinking it was one of my coworkers. Then the white shirt shape suddenly moved out of sight. Now, right away, I thought this was a prank. I caught them trying to scare me. So, as I'm walking around the corners, I'm kind of calling out, "Hey, I know you're there. I saw you in the reflection." I get around each corner, but I don't see anyone. I assume the guy had ducked into one of the conference rooms or offices as a backup. I checked all of them, and they were all empty. I called down on my radio to make sure someone was really up there with me and they're just hiding in a closet or something because they're a bunch of immature idiots. The second I heard both guys talking on the same radio, I felt myself getting just a little bit freaked out. Either I was having some kind of weird episode after power walking up those 9 flights, or my eyes were playing tricks on me, or something very bad was happening. So, naturally, I'm starting to get a little worried. Not majorly worried, just a little. I decided to take the elevator the rest of the way. I was still concerned about my health, but then as I'm walking back towards it, something happened that makes me feel cold just to think about to this day. It felt like someone walked up behind me, and it felt like it was fast. I heard the footsteps that definitely weren't my own, and I felt that feeling of imminent danger you get when someone rushes you from behind. I turned, had my hand on my sidearm, ready to defend myself. But there was nothing there. Just an empty corridor with me standing in it. I can't even really think of the words for the kind of fear that I was feeling in that moment. The best that I can come up with is it was like a physical force, and that fear hit me and pushed me towards the elevator at a speed walk. I was convinced that someone was up there with me. But at the same time, they either had to be psychic or a ninja to rush up on me like that, or at least make me feel like I was being creeped on. None of it made any sense, and more, I was thinking that there was something wrong with me, not that something weird was going on. Once I was safely in the elevator, I called down to my coworkers and asked them to watch all of the cameras on the 10th floor for any kind of movement. They replied, asking if I was all good or if I needed help, probably because they could hear the state I was in. But I told them to shut up, watch the cameras, and tell me if they could see anything or anyone. I was expecting a no, in which case I had to accept that I was having some kind of medical emergency and maybe even call 911. I heard about people having strokes or heart attacks and how they can feel confused or panicked, so that's all my hypochondriac mind was thinking about. But then, as my radio crackled to life again, I heard the next thing they said, and I swear to Christ that I felt like I was going to throw up. My coworker came back with, "Yeah, there's someone up there with you. We're headed for the elevator right now." I sent it down to the ground floor, and if I'm being honest, I was weirdly relieved. I wasn't about to have a stroke, and I wasn't going crazy. There really was someone up on the 10th floor, and they were about to get messed up for scaring the living daylights out of me. We swept all the rooms together, calling out to this potential intruder the whole time, saying things like, "Come on out, and you're only getting trespassing," and even saying things like, "This is a heck of a way to get yourself shot." We were just bluffing, and it wasn't a huge issue that we didn't find this intruder. They could have easily used the stairwell to escape to another floor. But instead of going and hunting them down, we just headed back down to the security office, watched the cameras, and waited for the real cops to show up. On the way back to the office, I asked my coworker what exactly he'd seen on those security cameras, and it turns out he hadn't seen anything definitive, just enough blurry movement on the edges of a monitor to know that someone was definitely up there. And they seemed like they knew where the camera's blind spots were. This is what really sent alarm bells ringing for my coworkers. Stuff like that suggests someone has cased the place, done a little recon in the daytime, possibly disguised as a client or employee. They'd know where to go to get whatever they'd come for, as well as how to get there without being spotted straight away. A lot of people have asked me how this person could have gotten into the building in the first place, and didn't that bother me at all? The question did bother me, but we're not trained to waste time thinking about how. We're trained to react to intruders as and when they occur, to focus on either locking them down for the cops or getting them out of the building without anyone getting hurt. You focus on the how afterward. In the moment, you focus on the intruder. Anyway, we watched the cameras, called the cops, and tried to work out where this intruder could have gotten to, while avoiding all the security cameras. We stared at the cameras for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before the cops showed up, and we didn't see any movement. When the cops arrived, we helped them sweep all the floors and offices to make sure no one was around. They were pretty thorough about it, opening up closets and checking under desks. But still, we found no one. Even the cops said that it must have been spooky for whoever was up there alone, which sounded like the understatement of the century. But right then, when we were dealing with the situation, I was sure that it wasn't just me going nuts. The situation was resolving itself, so I was relatively calm again. When the cops left, we switched on the alarm systems for floors 9 to 13, meaning if anyone entered those floors again, we'd be instantly alerted, and a 911 call would automatically be issued. No alarms were triggered that night, so we figured the episode was pretty much over and done with. We'd have to talk to the head of security about it, and there was no doubt that he'd be very interested in how he let something like that happen. But no one expected to get fired. In the weeks afterward, I realized how much the experience had affected me. The longer I went on wondering about it, the worse the feeling got. I thought I had put it behind me, but it turned out to be a major error in judgment on my part. Or maybe I just ignored my feelings. I thought about what could have made those noises and reflections. What could have given me that feeling like someone was rushing up behind me? After thinking about it for long enough, I decided that I didn't want to work there anymore. When I was told that I couldn't pick and choose which guard shifts I was on, I was left with no choice but to seek employment elsewhere. I'm not afraid to admit that I was scared of whatever happened up there. Rather than going down some crazy rabbit hole trying to explain it, I thought it was better just to walk away and start fresh someplace else. It's never happened again, nor anything like it, but you can bet your bottom dollar that if it does, I'm out of there. A couple of years ago, I was living in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, at a small hostel on the outskirts of the city. The hostel catered to long-term guests, so I got to know everyone who lived there pretty well. Among the residents, there was a guy named Raj, and Raj served as a middleman of sorts in the local casinos. The casinos in the area were incredibly shady places, filled with Russian mobsters and other low-life criminals from China and India. While the casinos were technically illegal, they managed to continue their operations through bribery and government coercion. I visited one of them once, and it was a surreal experience. Now, my friend Raj's job was to take online bets from Indian clients and then place those bets physically in the casino. Essentially, he played with their money and acted as the intermediary, allowing individuals to play from another location. He participated in some high-stakes games, handling large sums of money for some powerful people. It was a recipe for disaster waiting to happen. One night, Raj messed up big time. One of his clients managed to gain access to his online system and stole all the money his other clients had deposited to play with. The amount stolen was significant, with some losing well over $50,000, a fortune in this area. We only found out about the theft after Raj's sudden disappearance, and we discovered a cryptic note left in his bed, saying, "It's sad, don't look for me, I'm leaving." Among other things. The guy had vanished overnight. We filed a police report and waited to hear anything. After a few days, the police returned to the hostel, asking if someone who knew Raj could join them. The locals in the hostel were afraid to go with the police, so I volunteered. They took me to their headquarters, leading me to the back where I was shown photos of a body cut into pieces. It was Raj, brutally dismembered and dumped into the nearby sewer canal by an unknown assailant. They brought me there to identify the body, but they never found out who was responsible for this gruesome act. The images from those photos have haunted me, and I'll never forget them. I left the hostel shortly afterward. Raj might have been involved in some shady activities, but he didn't deserve such a gruesome fate. Don't forget to like the video. Thank you for your support. I work as a baker for a small bakery in a tourist town. I'm regularly at work around midnight most nights. I'm pretty close to the local strip of bars and clubs, so I hear late-night partygoers, sirens a few times a night, and people yelling. That kind of stuff. The weirdest story, which started out creepy but didn't end that way, was when I opened the door around 4 a.m. to someone knocking. The only reason I opened the door is because my boss had literally just texted me saying we might be getting an early delivery, so I thought it was that. I opened the door, and no one's there. I glanced around, thinking they knocked, and ran back to their truck to start unloading. Then suddenly, someone steps out of the shadows, looking like Slender Man. I panic but hold it together pretty well. Once they got out of the shadows, it obviously wasn't a monster. It was just a tall, skinny girl with no pants on, no shoes, and a shirt that obviously wasn't hers. This poor girl then asks me if she can borrow a phone. It clicks in my mind what could have happened, and I tell her to come in. I let her use my phone. She tries to call her boyfriend and tells me that essentially she just woke up after passing out. She didn't know where she was, and I was the only light on the street. I didn't ask what happened to her, but she was saying something about pulling a firearm earlier and was hyperventilating over the cops being called on her, so I didn't call them. Her boyfriend never answered the phone, but I helped her figure out where her hotel was. Luckily, it was on the same block we were already on. I couldn't leave to walk with her or drive because I had a million things in the oven. I actually gave her my phone with the place pulled up on Google Maps and the flashlight on. She walked there, made it back okay, showered, took a nap, and brought me back my phone later in the morning. She hugged me twice and thanked me profusely, and I'm just sitting there like, damn, I didn't think I was getting my phone back. But I'm glad it worked out okay. I don't know if she was assaulted or just the type to strip when drunk or what, but she seemed okay after having been back to her hotel room. It could have gone a lot worse for her, so I'm glad I was the door she knocked on. God, did she give me a heart attack at first? A few years back when I was doing any work I could get, I took up this gig at the 24/7 Walmart. It was a bit more rundown than your typical Walmart. Dimly lit aisles, flickering fluorescent lights, and an eeriness that only an empty Walmart at 3 in the morning can provide. So picture this, I'm stocking shelves in the cereal aisle, just trying to keep myself awake with the monotonous routine. And then, out of nowhere, this guy saunters in. He's tall, I mean basketball player tall, with long strides that make him seem like he's on some sort of mission. There's hardly anyone around, and this dude's pacing down the aisles like he owns the place. Kind of weird, but not out of the ordinary Walmart weird. Just a late night shopper with a peculiar vibe. I'm busy stacking cereal boxes when I catch sight of him again. He's standing at the end of the aisle, staring at me with this grin that could send shivers down your spine. The lighting's wonky, casting these creepy shadows that don't help my nerves. Before I can even process what's happening, he's right there, right in front of me. Close enough that I can smell the alcohol on his breath. He shoots me this look, like he's got the juiciest secret in the world, and then he says, "I've done something very naughty." What the hell? I try to laugh it off, brush it away with a nervous chuckle. But he's not having it. He keeps staring, that grin still plastered on his face. It's late, it's quiet, and the place is kind of creepy already. But this guy, he's turned it up to 10. He starts following me, aisle after aisle. Every time I turn around, there he is, watching and grinning. It's like he's playing a twisted game of hide and seek, and I'm not even a player. More like the unwilling target. I try to go about my work, but I can feel his eyes on me, like they're drilling holes into my back. Then, out of nowhere, he starts humming this tune. It's faint, just under his breath, but it's off-putting as hell. I can't put my finger on where I've heard it before, but it's that famously creepy whistling song. I decide to take a breather and head to the break room. Maybe I can shake him off and catch a few moments of normalcy. My coworker's in there, and we're shooting the breeze about assignments and exams, trying to keep things light. But the whole time, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. And guess what? I was right. I spot him at the entrance to the break room, just standing there, staring right at me. I freeze, and I swear the room got colder in that moment. I point him out to my coworker, and when he turns around, the guy's vanished. I glanced at my coworker. I couldn't read his expression. I asked him, "Did you see that?" He looks at me. The confusion is obvious in his eyes. See what? Clearly he saw nothing. I realized that he missed the entire encounter. It was only me who saw him. I ran my fingers through my hair, feeling a mixture of paranoia and frustration. "Never mind," I mutter, dismissing the topic. Maybe I'm just letting my imagination get the best of me. It was late and I'd not slept properly in days. My coworker's not as intrigued as I am. He's focused on the task at hand, more interested in getting his work done than in delving into whatever nonsense I was talking about. We head back to our posts, and I'm still rattled. I can't shake the image of that guy's grin. Hours pass, and I try my best to concentrate on my tasks, but the unease is a constant presence in the back of my mind. I keep glancing around, half expecting him to reappear. That creepy grin plastered on his face. And then, out of nowhere, he's back. My heart skips a beat, and my hands tremble. It's like a nightmare come true. He's standing there, that same grin on his face. My breath catches in my throat. Before I can even react, he's sprinting towards me, his steps quick and purposeful. Panic surges through me, and I freeze. What does he want? My mind races, but my body is paralyzed. He grabs me and easily picks me up. He starts shaking me and shouting in my face. And then, as if from a distance, I hear a shout. My coworker's voice cuts through the fear. "Hey, what's going on?" He's running towards us, his footsteps echoing in the aisle. The guy releases his grip on me, his attention shifting to my coworker. And in that split second, I find my voice. I scream as loud as I can and start beating on the guy. My coworker arrives, his presence enough to make the guy hesitate. He turns and bolts, disappearing down the aisle. I'm left shaking, my heart pounding. My coworker rushes to my side. He looks seriously concerned. "Are you okay?" he asks me. I nod. I'm completely out of breath from the screaming. We're both shaken, both trying to make sense of the madness that just unfolded. We call the police, and as we wait for them to arrive, I can't help but replay the encounter in my mind. What was that guy's deal? Why did he attack me? The police arrive and we recount the bizarre events. They search the area, but the guy is long gone. I tell him what happened and try to describe just how creepy and weird he was, and I mention that he said he'd done something naughty that night. Suddenly there's like 4 more cop cars pulling up, and they're taking this real seriously. My manager sent me home for the night and told me I didn't have to come in tomorrow. I checked the news the next day and saw that there had been a hit and run nearby with a suspected drunk driver killing a family of 3. The description of the suspect was almost exactly the same as the guy who attacked me. What the hell was this guy's problem? As far as I know, they never found him. I check the news occasionally just to see if he comes up, but I've not seen anything since. I've worked a few random jobs in my life. My first one was a summer job at 16 during summer break at a dairy farm. I absolutely hated it there, and it made it harder for me to find the motivation to even try finding work again when the time came. I don't really remember how I was first referred to the job, but the following summer, I ended up working as an office assistant for a self-employed photographer. My parents knew her because she used to be a member of their church, and my sister attended her 4-H program when she had it. By that time, her health had begun to take a hit, as she claimed it was a mixture of things from chronic Lyme to fibromyalgia. I had also been warned by my parents that she was a little off. She was very religious and claimed to have had real encounters with demons, even participated in some exorcisms. I'm an atheist and a skeptic, so I never took her stories seriously. Aside from the weird things she would tell me, she was mostly harmless and working for her was not very hard. The job basically required me to do a lot of data entry, as well as help prep her photos with some minor editing. She would also make me add her company watermark before uploading them. They'd end up on a site where her customers could browse them and then pick which ones they wanted to order. She primarily photographed horse events, dressage, stadium and cross-country jumping, etc. And for the first several months my job was in her living room, which was basically my office space at the time. Eventually, I was talked into tagging along at shows where she trained me as a photographer, and soon I was shooting at the events along with her. It was boring work, I won't lie. I'm not a horse person. But things didn't get weird until a year later when I learned the hard way it was not her that I needed to worry about. She had 2 sons. One who was out of state, the other who was in the Navy. The latter of the two, a guy called Nathan, I had only heard small things about. He was somewhere on the autism spectrum, but she was never clear on what exactly his diagnosis was. When he finally returned home and I met him for the first time while working in her living room, he seemed like a nice guy. A little odd, but not concerning. He was obsessed with movies, and being a bit of a movie buff myself, whenever he would venture to the living room to strike up a conversation, it would almost always be about whatever movies we were into or were excited to watch. I should point out here that I was 18 and he was in his mid-30s. At some point, he got it in his head that I was interested in him, though he never said anything directly to me. I had to find out about it from my parents. My mom worked as the secretary at the church, and Nathan somehow found out. I can only guess my boss had told him. One afternoon, Nathan showed up at my mom's desk and started gushing about his feelings. He talked about how much fun I was, how he loved talking to me, how he was planning to take me to the movies and take me to his church, and all these other plans he had for me. My mom was beyond uncomfortable, as was the pastor who happened to overhear it. And when I got home that night, she told me what had happened and suggested I make sure not to lead him on. I was completely baffled because I hadn't done anything. We'd never even discussed the possibility of doing anything together. I got even more uncomfortable around him over the next few weeks. I made an effort to acknowledge him less when he was around and keep the conversation short while stressing I had to do work. Eventually he got his own place and moved out of his parents' house, so I figured the problem had solved itself. A couple years later, I had moved out, my boss's company had closed, and I was working somewhere else. I was friends with both my boss and Nathan on Facebook, and around that time I was finally coming out as an atheist, something I couldn't do while I was still living at home. One night, my old boss messaged me, asking about a ring I had on my finger. It was a black ring with a white solid star in the middle of a black circle. Already knowing where she was going with this, I told her it was just a ring. She started accusing me of wearing a pentagram because she didn't know what a pentacle was and that I was promoting Satan. I tried several times to explain to her that not only was it not that symbol, but that also paganism has nothing to do with the devil anyways, but she refused to listen, so I just ignored her. It was typical behavior of her and not worth the argument. The next morning, I had a message from Nathan telling me I needed to come to his church with him. I told him no, and the messages I received back gradually grew angrier and angrier. He went from asking to demanding I go with him. He told me I was lost and that I would not find the answers I needed by living the life I was. Eventually he outright said he thought the fact that I was wearing a pentagram was disgusting and that I was opening myself up for possession. Knowing there would be even less of a point in arguing with him than there was with his mother, I went ahead and blocked both of them, deciding I was done with it all. Then he started showing up at my workplace. He would always search through the store until he found me, and then once he did, he would corner me and not stop talking to me no matter how many times I tried to dodge him or tell him I needed to get back to work. Eventually the managers caught on and started intercepting him whenever he showed up. I wasn't making enough to pay the rent with that job, so I had to take up a second one. Within a week of working my second job, which was in a different town, he started showing up there. This time I told the managers who he was, and after that, every time he showed up, I was allowed to hide in the back room behind a locked door while they sped his order along and got him out. One of those many encounters, while I was hiding in the back, one of the managers was back there with me, inputting employee time punches into the computer when the both of us heard Nathan shout in our direction. "I know you remember me." That was the last straw for them, and they told him his business was no longer welcome there. He stopped showing up at my other job as well for a while. Fast forward to a few years later, I was getting used to not having to look over my shoulder every shift or check the parking lot for his truck. Then one day, he reappeared. He was browsing a section I was walking past when he spotted me and got this deer in the headlights look. I made a beeline to the break room because just seeing him made me scared. After that, he started showing up regularly. I would always find ways to dodge and avoid him, but he would still eventually spot me and know I was still there. I was debating whether or not to tell the managers, because at this point it had been a while since he had done anything, and saying something just because I was nervous didn't feel right. Call me a coward or an idiot, but that was my thought process. What happened next made me regret not speaking up. It was bound to happen eventually, but one night he managed to catch me while I was at the customer service desk. He approached me and said hi, and I immediately started to look for someone to signal over so I could make a break for it. But before I could say a word, he said something that made me feel sick. "How's your little girl doing?" "She's 3, right?" I looked at him, horrified. I had him completely blocked from all of my social media. I had his number blocked. I was living at a new address, and I had not seen or spoken to his mother since she confronted me about my ring. I had not told either of them I was a parent now, or that I was married, and I was not friends with anyone who knew them. "How's your husband doing?" "He's good." "He's a good man," I said, trying to reinforce the idea that I was not available to him and that I had no desire to have anything to do with him. "Really? Where does he work?" At this point, I felt like I was going to pass out. Thankfully, another employee approached, and I got the hell out of there. As I was leaving, he called out behind me. "I'll see you again. We'll talk. We'll go out and do something together." "We will." I reported him to the managers, telling them everything about the encounter, including all the information that he should not have had. They were able to pull up his face on CCTV, and while I have not heard anything, I'm guessing one of them finally managed to approach him because I haven't seen him since. This has been going on for 10 years and I want it to finally be over. If he shows up again, I'm going to the police, but I'm seriously hoping it never comes to that. I just want him to stop. I haven't seen him since the incident with my managers. I think he may have gotten scared off. Turned out one of my coworkers used to work with him too at a different job, and she also made a complaint about him to the managers. I don't know what they did with that information afterwards, but I know he hasn't shown up since. It sounds like they plan to call the cops if he sets foot in the store again. With 2 employee complaints of stalker-like behavior, they refuse to ignore that. In 2002, I was 14 years old, starting freshman year. I was an awkward, nerdy girl that didn't know how to handle attention from boys, so you could say I made things worse for my situation. I had a knack for making friends with the weird people no one liked, but I tried to be friendly with everyone I met, so it wasn't a big deal to me. Unfortunately, that was also my downfall. Clubs were a big deal, and they actually had an anime club, so of course I was all about that. First club meeting, I sat next to a couple of friends and soaked it all up. I thought I was finally with my people. Then here comes Stalker Kid. I'd use his real name, but to this day I have no clue what it is. He sat in front of me, and being that person, I said hi. I could tell he was uncomfortable and didn't know anyone, so I was just being nice. And boy, did this guy cling to me for that one word. At first, he would just find me during lunch and just stand there mumbling things to me. He had such a soft voice, high-pitched, mousy little guy, that you just felt unnerved when he spoke to you. The way he would look at you as he spoke, I could never look him in the eyes. After a while, it became more asking about my personal life and what I was into. Me being dumb and naive, I tried to be friendly and chat while feeling incredibly uncomfortable. After a while, me and my friends would move to different tables, benches, even hallways to avoid him, but he always found me. After about a year of this, my best friend finally told me that if I didn't tell him to F off, he would. I really didn't want him around anymore, so, sure, go ahead. So one day during lunch, here comes Stalker Kid with his signature greeting. Barely above a whisper. Hey Nancy. My buddy just goes, dude, she's not interested, F off. Looking hurt, he shuffled away. I was like, man, you didn't have to be so hard on him, but thanks. I didn't see him much around school after that except for club days where he would just sit across the room and stare at me while my best friend glared at him. Cut to me being 16 and now driving to school. Minus the awkward club days, I didn't really notice anything from him. That is until an old gray beat-up car started parking next to me, extremely close. One day after school, he was waiting for me in that car. He started asking me how I've been, talking about prom and all that stuff. I was trying to rack my brain on how he knew that was my car, unless he had been watching me before and after school. I started getting there later and leaving later to avoid him because he was like clockwork. Finally, a boy I used to be friends with in elementary school was walking out with me and made a comment about how that guy is always next to my car and asked if he was my boyfriend. I immediately said no, and he's always following me around, and I hated it. It was really starting to freak me out. Bless this guy, because he walked right up to him and scared him off, threatening if he ever parked near me again he would kick his ass. I figured maybe that was enough to keep him away. So again, there was a small space where I would hear nothing of him except for my friends who had classes with him telling me how creepy he was. One friend had art class with him and said he would draw naked women constantly in his books. Junior year is wrapping up, and I started giving my best friend Jack lifts to school. He was on my way, so I figured why not. At some point, Jack started noticing that little gray car was always heading the same way after school and made a joke about Stalker Kid living next to him. Small world, right? I could only be so lucky. One day, as per usual, little gray car was following us, so we took a detour. Sure enough, he was with us every step of the way, and it was no longer a joke. We both started freaking out. I pushed the gas pedal as hard as my foot could push it and got the hell out of sight. A few other things happened. In order to get into prom, he had to ask someone from my year. So he asked some random girl from my softball team and then dumped her as soon as he got in. He then followed me all night. This includes to the after prom, where I had to avoid him the whole time. Our high school had a TV channel for kids to run, and during prom they would record the whole night. It took one of my friends to point it out, but throughout the whole video, it showed him behind me and following and staring at me all night. I didn't even realize. And the one that still creeps me out to this day is graduation for his class. I was scanning the crowd to see my friends who were graduating when I saw a hand wave as I passed by. I looked back, and of course it was Stalker Kid waving at me. How he picked me out of a crow's of thousands I will never know. 2006 senior year was great, no signs of creepy Stalker Kid, to the point where I kind of forget about him. I graduate, I choose a college in town, get a job at a local retail store and move on. Life was beginning to be normal. I work the gaming department, so you get the weird guys once in a while. One that I saw a lot was this little Mexican guy with glasses who never purchased anything but would just walk around from time to time. Then, Stalker Kid comes strolling in the doors and walks into gaming and just talks. I ask how he knew I worked here. He says his friend saw me and knew we were friends. I tried to radio for help for someone to come and get him out. Finally, a big guy from computers walks by and asks for my help in the back. Once he pulls me to safety, I tell him everything. From that point, security is aware and is told to watch for this guy. Of course, he wasn't doing anything physical, so all they could do for me is watch out for him. So every time he came in, they would tell me and I would dip back to the warehouse. I started seeing his friend, who he called Ninja, constantly, and all he ever did was walked around on his phone. I began to suspect he was texting Stalker Kid to tell him I was at work, because sure enough, 10 minutes later, he would come in. So I tested this theory and started walking randomly around the store. At one point, a friend who worked register asked why I would do this, so I had her take a walk with me on her break. I told her this ninja guy would follow us everywhere, even just going down a random aisle. Sure enough, he did, and she began freaking out. A few minutes later, I told her my stalker would walk through those doors. So I'm making my way to the warehouse, and out steps Ninja Guy from an aisle and he shouts, "She's right here." I just stared at him, like, what the hell do you think you're doing? Stalker Kid walks up behind me and asks why I'm always running away from him, and says that he lost my number, and asks if I can give it to him again. I say sure, knowing damn well that I never gave it to him. I go to the warehouse to get a pen and paper. I wrote down, "This is where I work, don't ever come here again," and handed it to him. I told him and his friend to leave and called for security, who walked him out. Security tells me later that he also cried while they took him out. Later that day, as I'm leaving work, security offers to walk me to my car. I say sure. Stalker Kid is out by my car waiting for me, so this is where security says he's not having it, and calls the police, which we are conveniently next to their headquarters. He books it when he sees the car. Few years go by, nothing comes up. I buy a fancy new car and don't see him much. I'm thinking that did the trick, and I'm finally free. 2012, my buddies and I are leaving work, ready to hit the night at the bar, per usual. We are all walking out the door, where we all have to stand and wait to hear the alarm sound to verify it's armed. As we are walking out, I hear it. That awful sound. "Hey Nancy." I cringe, grab my friend's arm and turn. There he is leaning on his car, waiting. My friend recognizes him and asks what he wants. Guy says he just wants to talk to me. He said he didn't ever see my car, so he didn't think I worked here anymore. His other friend is sitting in the back seat of his car just staring at me blankly. I start to think the worst. If my friends leave me here, something tells me I'm not coming into work the next day. Or ever. I'm terrified that he's had years of time to think about our last encounter where I wrote my number down and made him cry. I grab my friend's arm tighter. My friend kicks off, pretends to be my boyfriend and rips into him. My friend is about 2 feet taller and much bigger. They get into it, and I'm just standing in the parking lot and I'm just begging for my friend to kick his ass. He spooked Stalker Kid so bad that I'm pretty sure he pissed himself before getting in his car and booking it. Ever since, if he comes into the store, my friend stares him down from his office. Years later, I've moved on, gotten married, and moved out of town. Recently we've moved back to start a business, and to this day, I still feel myself looking behind me at stores on the off chance that I randomly bump into him. He caused me to have anxiety, mental and emotional pain, fear and trust issues for a decade. Even after moving on, I still feel the effects today. And I never even knew his name. I'll begin by giving a little background. At the time this happened, I was a 16-year-old girl working at a chain coffee place while in high school. I am 19 now, and in college, 7 hours away from this place. This happened at a time in my life in which I was super shy and had a tough time standing up for myself. In retrospect, I could have handled it a lot better. I used to work closing shifts with my best friend after school. It'd be from like 3 to 10 p.m. We worked at a relatively dead store, so we spent most of our time playing music and talking. We did our duties like taking the trash out and restocking, etc., although both of us always dreaded taking the trash out, as we had to go out back. The dumpsters were behind the store, in a dimly lit area, next to a sketchy liquor store. One night a man came in pretty late. It wasn't unusual to have customers come near closing. It was just uncommon to see anyone we didn't already know. Our store was mostly just regulars. He was lanky and probably around 30. I mostly just remember his eyes. They were piercing, the type that never break a stare. I remember initially thinking he was attractive. Yikes. The way he spoke was short and concise, just ordering a small hot latte. I made his order and that was it. I told my friend about how I thought he was attractive, and we then started referring to him as the small hot latte guy. We always call people by their drink orders. He came a bunch of times after that. Each time staying a little longer and longer, talking a little more and more. One day he came with a woman, presumably his girlfriend. I remember I felt a little weird, like she was staring at me, or like they had spoken about me beforehand. She glanced over at him and said, "Wow, she is pretty." I didn't think much of it, said thank you, served them, and I thought that would be the end of it. He then began showing up and talking to me a lot without her. He started off as being friendly. I honestly don't even know what we'd talk about. Then he got kind of flirty. Initially I was just flattered, but being underage and immature, I didn't even think about the fact that it was kind of alarming. He began to stay for a while. Sometimes he would bring a laptop or a notebook. I could feel him staring at me and listening to our conversations. But at that point I wasn't getting creepy vibes from him, as my coworker and I had dealt with our fair share of creeps. He began by just giving little snacks or drinks. I would accept, but would never eat or drink them. It wasn't that I necessarily thought he had ill intentions, I just had a hard time accepting gifts. I remember one night he brought me a book about one of his favorite artists. I reluctantly took it but had tried to decline before. I remember telling him about one of my favorite musicians and sent him a link to a performance I really liked. He started being kind of sexual while still talking about the song. He then began talking super suggestively, and I would laugh it off and decline when he asked to send pictures. I began talking less and less and told my friend about the situation. She agreed that it was getting creepy and said I should maybe change my schedule. I told her I'd be fine, I'm stubborn. He'd still come every week at closing time, and he'd even stay in his car till we closed. Meaning he'd watch me go to the back to take the trash out. It was time to take out the trash and lock up, so we got ourselves together. I was opening the door while juggling like 3 bags of trash and saw something on the ground. I was confused at first, but then realized what I saw. It was flowers and a note. I felt sick to my stomach and looked around the parking lot. I didn't see his car. I threw them away immediately and told my friend I didn't want to read the note. She read it and told me I had to. It was something to the effect of, "I've never felt so connected to someone. You're breaking my heart. Please don't do this. I'm sorry." Looking back, I honestly didn't lead him on, but initially I felt as if I was in the wrong. Nonetheless, we turned the corner to take the trash out and both prayed the parking lot was empty. It was not. Let's just say the trash was not going to get taken out that night. I continued working there and still worked there on my breaks from college. I had different hours after that. Nothing happened for some time until one day he appeared again, just before I was supposed to leave for college. It was around 3 p.m. It was busy. He came in, stared at me, and then he left. That was the last time I saw him. Looking back, I was so naive and could have handled the situation so much better. I am forever thankful to my friend. She really supported me that whole time. A year ago, I used to post my entire life to Snapchat. It was my go-to app for sharing bits of my life with friends and family. But then something happened that made me reconsider my online presence. One day, out of the blue, I received a friend request from an unfamiliar username. I didn't think much of it at the time and accepted the request without a second thought. It was just another random person, or so I assumed. Months passed, and I forgot about that peculiar friend request. My life went on, and I continued sharing snippets of my daily activities on Snapchat. Little did I know that someone was watching, very closely. It started innocently enough, with an unexpected snap. I opened it, thinking it was probably a friend sharing a funny meme or a cute pet photo. But as the image loaded, my heart almost stopped. It was an eerie, edited version of an old Snapchat story I had posted months ago. Floating love hearts surrounded the image, and the caption read, "Can't wait to see you." The chill running down my spine was hard to ignore. How did someone get access to my old stories? Who was behind this? Days turned into weeks, and more edited snaps kept arriving. Each one featured pictures taken from my past stories. The captions became increasingly unsettling, referring to my personal life. "How was your McDonald's on Friday?" And another said, "I loved that movie you watched last night." The sense of being watched was inescapable. I felt exposed and vulnerable, as though a stranger had invaded my privacy. It wasn't long before I decided to check Snap Maps, the feature that lets you see the real-time locations of your friends. My heart raced as I zoomed in on the map. There it was, a bit too close for comfort, the location of this creep. He was nearby, and the thought sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary prank or trolling. It felt personal, like someone was playing mind games with me. Fear gripped me as I realized the mysterious friend was getting closer to my location. I knew I had to act fast. I began taking screenshots of the disturbing snaps for evidence. Then, I contacted the local authorities and reported the unsettling situation. The investigation that followed uncovered the identity of the creep. To my shock, it turned out to be someone I met at a party months ago. I'd been warned about how creepy and weird he was. He would just invite himself to parties and nobody wanted to be rude and kick him out, so we just tolerated him. To be fair, I had no issue with him and spoke with him a little bit throughout the night, but didn't see much of him. I guess being nice to the social outcast when everyone else kept him at arm's length was enough for him to become obsessed with me. They didn't end up charging him with anything, but they told him to leave me alone and explained to me that I could get a restraining order, but I didn't see the point. This happened a couple of months ago, December of last year. I started working a new job in the mall and had to work for most of Boxing Day. I was done at 10 and transit seemed to have ended at 7. I'm a student who didn't go home for the holidays due to this job and never had to deal with holiday transit hours. I decided to call an Uber and the driver picked me up right in front of the mall. We had a casual conversation during the drive back and he learned about where I worked and how I'm living on my own for the time being since my roommates went to their hometowns. Fast forward to the next day at work, around 6 p.m. This driver walks into the store and tries to strike a conversation with me, but I told him I had to get back to work. He also asked if we could hang out later, to which I said no, and he left. At the end of that shift, I walked out of the store, planning to take transit. As soon as I stepped out of the store, the driver immediately pulled up next to me and offered to give me a free ride back home. After going back and forth with me declining and him saying it's free, I decided to walk away and caught a bus home. I was pretty overwhelmed by the fact that he showed up to my workplace and waited 3 hours until I was done with work to offer me a ride home. I've reported this to Uber and they've notified me that they suspended this driver, provided me with a full refund and gave me a link to provide to the police if I plan on filing a report. Silly of me to give away information like that to a stranger, but I hope to never meet that driver again. He was about twice my age, he knows where my home is, and my name. Lesson learned. To preface this, I love to drive. I've loved to go on drives for hours to nowhere with no destination in mind, just me, my music, and the road ahead of me. Living in Nebraska, I'd often take back roads or lonely highways cutting through the countryside to small towns and eventually cities. And I'd usually take these drives at night since there was less traffic to worry about. I've done it since I've had my license 5 years ago, and I've never once had any sort of issue, nor have I ever run into any trouble. That was, until a few nights ago. For reference, I'm a relatively small 22-year-old female, and as I've stated before, I often take these drives completely and utterly alone. They're a good way to clear my head when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or for me to get a plan together to sort personal issues out. I've also done these long and lonely drives to get away from the toxicity of my household when I used to live with my parents as a means of coping with their alcoholism. Though now that I've moved out and I'm in a much better place mentally, I don't really have the urge to get in my car and just drive anymore. However, on the night this event took place, I was feeling pretty overwhelmed, stressed, and anxious with a cluster of personal issues I'd rather not get into. I felt restless and irritable around my boyfriend. I couldn't focus on anything else and decided I would take a drive to clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to be careful and to not be gone for too long since it was getting pretty late. I agreed, gave him a kiss goodbye, and left. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but I was still feeling on edge about everything transpiring in my personal life, so I decided to drive further north down those familiar, dark, winding one-lane highways. I kept the car at a steady 65 miles per hour, taking the turns at a slower pace in case a deer jumped out around the bend. I kept driving and was just admiring the vast empty darkness of the snow-capped fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit creepy being all alone with no cars in sight in seemingly the middle of nowhere. The few houses miles back from the road were lightless, and the dead cornfields withered away. Snow started to cover them entirely. It was like something out of a horror movie, and I half expected to see a ghost pop up in my rearview mirror or see someone clamber out from the patches of trees dotting the horizon. The only light came from my headlights, and even then I still strained to see through the inky darkness of the night. By now it was just after 11, and I told myself that once I made the familiar roundabout that would either take you to a small town or back up towards the city, I would head back to the city and home. That roundabout was still maybe 15 to 25 minutes away, but other than my imagination picturing the worst, I wasn't really all that concerned. I mean, I was by myself. I didn't have any other motorists to worry about, right? Wrong. As I'm rounding another bend, I notice a vehicle with its hazards flashing maybe a quarter of a mile or something away from me. It was some sort of sedan, dark-colored, and was angled to where only part of it was on the shoulder while the rest was jutted onto the road, like they had to pull over in a hurry but didn't quite manage to do that. The driver's side door was flung wide open, and as I slowed my vehicle down and angled it towards the opposite side of the road to pass, I could make out what looked like maybe blood on the inside of the open door. I didn't see anyone on the road or in the car, and I was the only motorist in sight. In this part of the country, cell phone reception is pretty bad most of the time. But more often than not, you couldn't get reception no matter how hard you prayed, which was definitely the case when I took a glance at my phone to see if I had any service. So, a lone female on the road, at night, pulling up near a vacant vehicle that looks like someone had been attacked on the inside, with no cell service. Now, I'm no dummy. I've watched countless episodes of Investigation Discovery and Criminal Minds, and read far too many true crime books to know that this had bad and danger written all over it. But there was still a small part of me that worried something terrible had happened to whoever was in that vehicle, and I thought I needed to help. These roads don't get a lot of traffic at night, and temperatures were well below freezing. If someone were hurt or in trouble, there was no one and nothing else to help them. Still, I erred on the side of caution. I was still driving my car, though a bit more slowly, and as I approached the vehicle I rolled down my passenger window a bit, shut off the music, and called out, "Hey, anyone there? Are you okay?" I didn't hear a response. I worried they were passed out somewhere, but I wasn't about to get out and look for them. I told myself I'd call out one last time, and if I didn't hear anything I would leave, and the moment there was reception I'd call it in. And if I did hear someone, well, I'd figure out my next course of action then. So, again I shout, "Hey! What happened? Are you okay?" There was silence for a while, and then I heard rustling in the shadows of the trees, followed by a rough voice responding to me. I was relieved at first, and was about to say something in response or possibly even stop my car and get out, when I noticed three things nearly simultaneously. As I inched my way past the front of the sedan, I noticed there was no damage to the hood or anywhere else on the vehicle, which I found to be strange considering the blood on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught a glance of someone coming out from behind the sedan, and they were making their way towards my car, fast. The person didn't have any blood on them, nor did they appear injured in any way, and they were wearing a mask, not like a face mask for COVID, or a ski mask or anything normal, but one of those masks you would see in the Purge movies. And they were holding something in their hand. I don't know what it was. I couldn't get a good look, but from its length and shape my guess was maybe a tire iron or a crowbar or something. I don't need to tell you that I slammed on the gas as soon as I noticed those things, and drove like a bat straight out of hell. My heart thundering in my chest and my entire body shaking. My window was still rolled down in my haste, and the music was still shut off, so I could very clearly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I had no clue what they were saying. I just knew I had to get out of there immediately. I stole one last look in my rearview mirror as I drove away, mostly to see if they were getting in their sedan to follow chase or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon was still standing in the middle of the road watching me, and right before I looked away from the mirror I saw a second man emerge from the trees that had been rustling earlier, also wearing one of those creepy masks and no trace of blood on him. I probably broke every law for speeding that night, but I wanted to get as far away from those men as possible. As soon as I made it to the roundabout, I turned towards town, parked in the Walmart parking lot that thankfully still had cars from who I assumed were workers closing up shop, and proceeded to have a full-on meltdown. When I could pull myself together, I called one of my friends, Troy, who was a police officer, to tell him what happened. He was concerned for me, and after asking if I was okay, where I was, did they follow me, etc., he told me since it was out of city limits he couldn't do much on his end. But he could get in contact with the local police or sheriff in that jurisdiction to take my statement and check it out. I agreed, thanked him, and while I waited for police to show up, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs I managed to tell him what happened, not even 10 minutes ago. He was, as you could imagine, really concerned for my safety, and wanted me to either come home immediately or drive down himself to take me home. I told him the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave and that I was okay, but I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar police cruisers pulling into the lot. I gave the police my statement, and they assured me they would go back to the spot to take a look and that they would try to catch the guys who did it. But with no cameras and no description of the men, I wasn't sure they'd be able to. I didn't even get the license plate number, though at the time of my panic, the thought never came to mind until the police were asking me if I got it. All they had to go off of was a dark-colored sedan and two guys with masks. After I gave my statement, I went home and stayed curled up close to my boyfriend the whole night, listening to every sound the house made, in fear it would be those guys arriving any minute to finish whatever it was they started. Since the incident, I haven't heard back from police about whether or not they have any leads, and I'm not sure they ever will. I'm just thankful I'm still here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what would have become of me if I had. I still have so many questions that have no answers. What were they doing? Was that blood on the inside of the car, or just a ruse to get more attention? If it was really blood, did they hurt someone else? What would have happened to me if I had stopped my car? Needless to say, I won't be going on any more late night drives, and I hope I never cross paths with those freaks again. If you're enjoying the video so far, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It all started with a normal day at work. I worked at a small grocery store at the time, and my duties consisted of gathering shopping carts in the parking lot and bagging groceries, the usual minimum wage stuff. It was raining that morning, and of course, I was assigned to carts. About 2 hours into my shift, I saw a man rushing to get his groceries into the car. I ran over to him and started helping him with his bags. Mind if I help you get out of the rain? Yes. Thank you so much. As he was closing his trunk, he looked at me with a very surprised look on his face. He lowered his eyebrows, skinned me from head to toe, and smirked. Are you a new hire? No, I've been here for a couple of months. Oh, you are very pretty, he said in a weirdly sensual tone. Thank you. Have a good day. I shut it down. I was not interested. As I was walking back to the store to hide until he left, I could feel him watching me while I walked away. Nevertheless, I continued to work, not really thinking about it. After my lunch, I was at the register bagging groceries, and I noticed that same man from earlier walk in. I pretended I didn't see him and just kept bagging. He came up to the register and got a single chocolate bar. I didn't give him a bag. He stands towering over me and says, "Are you going to bag my item?" "Oh, sorry, I didn't know you wanted a bag for one thing." I put his chocolate bar in a bag and told him to have a good day. "When are you off work, sweetheart?" Man, I'm not comfortable giving that information out." He returned with, "That's okay, you've been here, 5 hours? You probably get off around 7, right?" He smiled, winked at me, and walked away. Disgusted, I went to my manager and told her what happened. She told me not to work the lot anymore and to ask someone to walk me to my car. So by the end of my shift, I had a male coworker walk me to my truck, and we scanned the parking lot, looking for this man's car. We didn't see him, so my coworker went back inside and I started my truck. I called my mom to tell her about what happened, and once she answered, I left the parking lot. Literally, the second I turned onto the road, I saw his car pull onto the road behind me. I told my mom I thought he was going to follow me, and she just told me to drive around to try and lose him. I drove around for about 20 minutes, just going in circles around my town. I hit a red light and he pulled up next to me and started yelling something to me out his open window. I, of course, pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear what he was saying. "You would bear some good kids for me. You'd make a great slave for me, little lady." He then started being very explicit about what he was going to do to me if he caught me. I told my mom I was going to dial 911, and if I wasn't home in an hour, then call the police. While I was trying to call the cops, the man speeds ahead of my truck and starts brake checking me. Frantic, I wait for the closest intersection and turn up the block. My phone fell under my seat while I was turning, so I decided to go to the nearest open establishment and run in and hide and have someone else call for help. The closest open business I could find was a convenience store and a gas station. I pulled in, parked, and ran for my life into the store. I told the clerk what's happening, and she took me to the break room and locked me in there. While processing that I might have survived this ordeal, I hear the doors of the storefront start violently rattling, and before I knew it, the clerk was locking herself in the break room with me. She was on the phone with the police, and they were on their way. We were silent. Cowering in a dark room, I found myself feeling guilty for wrapping another woman into our worst fear. My thoughts were racing through. I said to him, "Did I lead him on? I just told him to have a good day. Has he been following me for longer than tonight? How did he know what car I drive? Are the police going to get here in time? Are we going to die? Finally, the small room was illuminated with red and blue lights from the crack under the door. We hear a voice over the intercom telling us it's safe to come out. Whilst shaking, the clerk took out her keys and opened the door, so we walked out and gave our statements. After the police leave, I turned to my unexpected savior and profusely thanked her. We cry, hug, and she walks me to my car. The next night I went back and brought her some food and an Amazon gift card. I have been in a near-fatal car accident 10 feet away from a mountain lion in the wild, but I can tell you, with total honesty, I thought that was the end of my line. Thank you for reading. Stay aware, be cautious, stay safe. This encounter would have happened a little over 10 years ago. I would have been about 26 at the time. I can't remember exactly what year this was, but it was around 2012. At the time, I was frequently going out with my friends to bars and parties, and hanging out until pretty late most weekends. The friend's house that I usually hung out at was on a side street just off a main road where a lot of popular and crowded bars and restaurants were. You had to park on the street at his house, and during the weekend when it was busy, it was pretty common to have to park a number of blocks away. The street closer to the bars was pretty nice, but if you went a few blocks in the opposite direction, it got a little sketchier at night. After a night of hanging out, I had to walk back to my car pretty late, which was parked a number of blocks away towards the slightly sketchier area. This was during the winter, so I was wearing some kind of heavy sweater or pullover and beanie hat. This detail is only important as you couldn't really gather much idea about what I looked like from a distance in the dark, aside from my general height and build. There wasn't much through traffic as you got further away from the bars, and the roads were pretty dark without any street lights. As I was walking down the sidewalk, a car started slowly creeping down the street, matching my pace as it pulled up beside me and then stopped. The window of the car rolled down, and driving the car was an attractive young woman who said that I looked cold and that I should let her give me a ride to where I was going. She seemed very friendly. I indicated that I wasn't parked far away and appreciated the offer, but was going to just keep walking. She then tried really hard to convince me to get in the car with her, since it was so cold. No small talk to establish any information about me to make sure I wasn't a weirdo, just asking me to get in the car pretty aggressively. Based on what I was wearing and how dark it was, there was no way she really could have had much idea about what I actually looked like to possibly find me attractive, and even if she did, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight when they're alone in their car. There were about 10 bars nearby she could have gone to if she just wanted to pick up a guy. There was no reason I could think of that she would have to resort to driving around offering to pick up strangers. She continued to drive alongside me and offered me a ride again, which I declined and kept going. I picked up my pace and she eventually drove off. As soon as she was a few blocks away, I quickly got to my car and made sure there was nobody lurking around or close by. The whole scenario felt off and didn't make sense to me. I asked my friends about it later, and all of the women agreed they wouldn't offer a random guy a ride, especially at night time, in that kind of scenario, even if the guy looked like Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. My suspicion is that there was someone laid down in the back seat of the car out of view with a weapon waiting to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't really figure out any reason she would be offering rides like that to complete strangers in the middle of the night, as it would be very unsafe for her to just pick up random strangers. I just assumed there had to be something nefarious going on in that car, and I do wonder what would have happened if anyone just hopped in the car with her. I hope you're enjoying the stories so far. Thank you for supporting the channel. Back when I was 18 years old, I was house sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family we were house sitting for went to the same church as her, but I didn't really know them well myself. It was more to keep her company in a huge house. This was 1997, when the average teen like me didn't have a cell phone. During that week, there was a short break in the school calendar, which is why this family was away, and why the streets in the area were quieter than usual. My apartment, as well as the house we sat for, was not far from the university. My apartment was actually a 3-minute walk from it, and the house a further 5 minutes by car. So being a student neighborhood, it was particularly quiet this week. The first weird thing that happened during the week I was at this house was that I dreamed I was driving through a dark forest on a hilly dirt road with no lights anywhere except for those from my car's headlights. As I started to go down a hill, the headlights suddenly cut out and everything went dark. The car slowed down to a stop and died. I woke up. In the morning I went out to my car and it wouldn't start. It had been working perfectly the day before. I had to call a guy to come fix it. It was the starter motor. Well, that was the first creepy thing that happened that week. About a day later, it was Friday. I planned on driving back home to my parents, who lived in a smaller town about 45 minutes away. I packed up my stuff at the big house and was going to head over to my apartment to collect whatever else I needed for the weekend. That trip between the house and apartment was, as I mentioned, only 5 minutes or so away. Since it was winter, it was dark by the time I left at around 7 p.m. As I was driving from the house, I noticed in my rearview mirror the headlights of the car behind me tailing me really close. Whenever I would turn, it would also turn. Back then I was cautious, but not overly so. Cautious enough to notice in such a short distance that something weird was going on behind me. But then when I pulled up to a traffic light, it wasn't there anymore. Relief. Short-lived. The car was now beside me. I looked to my right, and there was a man inside. Alone. Smiling at me. Looking like a maniac. For a moment I thought, geez, I should really drive with a beanie on at night so people can't see that I'm a petite 5'2" female with long blonde hair down to my waist. I also thought, well, he's in the lane to turn right, so I'm good. I pulled off, and the headlights were behind me again. What an ass, I thought. Who drives like that? Thank goodness my turn is coming up on the left soon. After another minute or two of this tailgating, I slowed down, strategically didn't indicate, and made a sudden sharp left into my driveway, opened the automatic gates, and shot inside. The gates closed behind me. I gave out a sigh of relief, thinking that the drama was over. I gathered a few things from the car to take up with me and noticed on my way over to the stairwell that there was a man at the gate that had just closed behind me. He was still on the other side, and I was at the far end of the parking lot, but I could make out it was the dude from the tailgating car. He was jumping up, shaking the gate with absolute rage. Well, I was safely on this side, so I wasn't completely gripped with fear. And besides, there was a group of students making a noise nearby, arriving for a party or something. I headed to the stairs and started going from ground level to the first floor. Rounding the stairs on the first floor, I noticed someone running across the parking lot towards the staircase. In hindsight, I still can't fathom why I didn't realize what had happened. I guess it's because I subconsciously knew that there was the group being let in through the pedestrian gate. As I was rounding the staircase between the second and third floors, someone suddenly touched me. I spun around. The guy. He had slipped in as part of the small crowd. He said something. I said something sassy back and told him to F off. Then I turned my back on him to continue up the stairs. I lived on the third floor. He grabbed me from behind and held my back against his chest with his left arm around my neck. I felt something being held against my right side. Aw, crap. A knife. He led me down. I remember thinking that the light was broken on the bottom level. This can't end well. But I was calm. I resisted slightly, and he tightened his grip. I felt like I wasn't getting enough oxygen. I started to become a dead weight. He started to drop me. I was groin level. I elbowed. It connected. He dropped me but spun around to face me. He ripped the front of my button-down top. Then he stopped. He looked at someone behind me. Someone taller than him. His eyes went wide. He turned and ran. I screamed. Then I too turned around to see who had come to help. There was no one there, but people came out of their apartments after that. The police were called. This was the second time they were there that night. Turns out the other weird thing that happened was that my dad had already called the police and they had come past an hour before. My mom had had a weird feeling all evening and had hassled my dad endlessly that something bad was going to happen to me. She had been right. As it turned out, they caught him. I identified him in a lineup. He was a serial offender in the area. He was accused of assaulting something like 14 women. One had thrown herself out the first floor of her apartment to get away from him and broken her leg. Weeks later, the police called me. Before his trial, his cell door had been left open. He was gone. Apparently an inside job. I've had a few creepy things happen to me in my life, but this one still makes me think about how things could have gone wrong very quickly. I'm a 20-year-old female, and this story takes place back when I used to live in southern Indiana, in a seriously remote area. It was a weekend night, and my best friend and I were heading home after a graveyard shift at a local waffle joint. She decided to pick up her dog from her house so we could spend the night at my place. That's important later. We started heading into the rural countryside where I lived, and to get to my house, you had to travel down a long, narrow dirt road. About a mile in, we spotted a truck's headlights. As we got closer, we realized it was a nice truck, probably from around 2018. I can't say I know much about cars, so cut me some slack. The truck was parked sideways, blocking the entire path. Confused, I got out of the car and asked if the driver was okay. He looked hopeful when he saw me at first and said, "I'm just waiting for a friend to come get me, my truck's stuck." He smiled at me, but I noticed his pupils were nearly completely dilated. He glanced back at my car, saw that I had someone with me, and noticed the dog sticking its head out the window. His smile quickly faded, and he remarked, "Pit bulls are mean and nasty." With that, he turned around and got back in his truck. I returned to my friend and said, "Put this in reverse and use whatever hood race skills you have to get us out of here." We reversed my poor 95 Caddy, which really shouldn't have been driving on a dirt road, and made our way back to the main road, feeling relieved. We took a different route home. But then, to our surprise, the same guy was parked on that road, standing off to the side, smiling and staring into our headlights. We were on the verge of panicking and floored the gas pedal the rest of the way home. I don't know how he got there before us or what his intentions were, but I'm thankful I wasn't alone, being a pretty naive college girl at the time. Even though the presence of the pit bull probably saved us from that man, the dog actually ended up randomly snapping at my friend a few months later, causing her serious injuries. It had been a good dog its entire life, and I know she was a good owner, so I guess it's just an instinct thing with pit bulls. They can snap at any moment. Please leave a like and a comment if you haven't already. What was your favorite story?